Milk. That's just for babies, right? Well, maybe not. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill out at Harvest Hills Ranch, and I enjoy talking about products that we produce out here on the ranch and the things that you really probably don't get as much attention as they should. And today I thought I'd jump into this conversation around milk. Recently I've been looking at some of the active components in milk and just blown away by the things that I continue to find in milk. And today I wanted to share some of those things with you and maybe provide a different perspective on where milk fits into the lifespan. Sometimes we hear these arguments that, well, milk is just for babies, or especially when it comes to cow milk, once in a while you hear that, well, that's just for calves. So why would a human consume that, especially beyond infancy? Well, I think there's certainly some reasons to point to, and I'll start us off today by saying that this conversation is geared towards milk, meaning whole milk, not low-fat milk, not whey protein, milk, as we would directly source it from the cow. Now, when we look at the application of dairy, and so let me also refine that a little bit, because I guess I should go on to say that we can talk about this in the context of some of the products that are made from milk. So maybe just simply thinking about things like cheeses and yogurts and kefir and some of these other types of products that we see that are dairy derived. So those would fall into this conversation as well. But really, where does that fit into the conversation for an adult, and especially an aging adult? And this is really the context of our conversation today, is that I want to talk about the older population, really the opposite end of the lifespan compared to when many people think about milk utilization being typically childhood. But let's talk about it in older years now, in the later portion of our life. And we know that one of the things that we run into in that time frame of our life is what's known as sarcopenia. Now, sarcopenia just means loss of muscle mass and strength, but the implications behind that are far greater, because ultimately what that does is cause us to lose our functionality, and we're unable to accomplish the things that we would normally be able to accomplish throughout the day. We're unable to facilitate the task of our daily living, and it does predispose us to increased health risk associated with that, both metabolic when we lose muscle tissue as well as physical. So for example, we're more frail. Our frailty increases when we don't have as much muscle mass and strength, and frankly we have to become more dependent on other individuals to help us try to accomplish the things that throughout our life we've been able to do ourselves. And nobody likes to feel like they're in that position. So all of that being said, that's sarcopenia. So what can we do to be able to offset sarcopenia? And really the conversation today is, what is milk? Where does milk fit into that conversation? And I think I want to, rather than taking the approach that I do a lot of times with videos and going through different research and showing you that, I'm just going to summarize what I've found in the research and then point you to two specific things here that I think are important points to draw out. So the summary on the research on this is that there's been both clinical trials and observational studies. So we've sat back from the outside and we've looked at what the utilization of dairy in the diet does for the older individual and how that affects them. And then we've also there's been studies that have been performed where they directly set up a protocol, ran the protocol, and used a control group and saw what the outcome was between the control group and the interventional group. So an interventional study. And in short, what these reviews, these meta-analyses, what they end up showing for the most part is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of significant change with the intervention of dairy. And from that, you look at it and go, well, maybe we just shouldn't consume dairy. But we have to hit the pause button here, because there's a lot that's left unsaid with that. And there's a lot of question marks that still arise from these studies. And hopefully I can make an argument for you that there still is an application for dairy. And in fact, what many of these studies, while they don't show definitive positive outcomes of direct impact on sarcopenia, what they do suggest is that there's still likely a positive role here. And the reason that likely still exists is because we haven't properly performed these studies. So before I delve into looking at that and tackling those issues around insufficient protein intake, insufficient inclusion of resistance training into the conversation, let's just look at what some of the potential roles are for why dairy may be beneficial to an aging individual, and especially an aging individual who's looking to try to maintain muscle tissue. So with that being said, let me share an image with you that I thought was pretty impactful. It really does an excellent job of illustrating what it is that dairy contains. And again, we're talking whole dairy here, but looking at what whole dairy contains and many of the things that we hear about, but also many that we don't hear about in here as well. And there's actually a list that goes even beyond what I'm showing on the screen here. But if we just look at the major macronutrients, thinking our protein, fats, and carbohydrates here, and then we look at vitamins and minerals as micronutrients, let's break these down and talk about what milk actually has and how that might have a beneficial role here as it relates to building muscle tissue later in the life. So first, when we look at protein, that's probably the most obvious in this, especially when we think about whey protein. Whey protein's highly anabolic. Casein has anabolic nature to it as well. And within both of these categories, we also have compounds that are noted as bioactive peptides. So what that means is that these are proteins that have very specific biological roles. And from that biological role, we can see that they're going to impact our physiology in a specific way. So there's several of these that exist within whey protein. You've got things like stuff called glycomacropeptide, beta-lactoalbumin. There's several of lactoferrin being another one. So there's quite a few of these. But many of these are going to have roles as immune modulating proteins and peptides, if you will. And the reason that that is important as it relates to the conversation around sarcopenia and muscle loss is that sarcopenia, the muscle loss and loss of muscle strength, is not simply the fact that you just weren't doing anything and you were just being sedentary. There appears to be an immune-related role to that as well. There appears to be an inflammatory role to that. And so we have to also think about how do we affect the inflammatory process to be able to offset sarcopenia, and then how do we also positively impact the immune system so that it's working for us and not against us. So those are things that those proteins can support. Now, what about the fats? Well, fats are certainly going to help us with nutrient deliverability. In fact, I'm going to show you before I end this video today the notion that whole dairy really is a better intervention than looking at sources of dairy that are, say, for example, just subsets of the whole dairy. So for example, maybe just looking at just casein or just whey protein or just some other component of dairy. Really the full, what's classified as the whole dairy matrix is really what we're looking to consume and get the most benefit from. And a lot of this seems to revolve around including in having the fats included in with the dairy consumption and not just solely focusing on the protein. So the idea here is that I made mention of these benefits that the proteins have, but when you consume those with the fats, there's an amplification process that takes place here. At least that's what's observed. And this really shouldn't be that big of a stretch for us to wrap our head around, because this is not something that appears to be unique to just dairy. For example, I can think of studies where eggs have been studied and they look at whole eggs versus egg whites, and specifically speaking to muscle protein synthesis, since we're talking about muscle loss. And we see that consuming the whole egg has a greater impact on muscle protein synthesis as compared to just simply consuming the egg white. And so same thing with the dairy. Whole dairy is going to be a better option there because you do get the nutrient deliverability on that. It does have some anti-inflammatory and immune modulatory effect on that. And to be honest with you, the fats are the most nutrient dense macronutrient, right? So you've got 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories per gram with your proteins and your carbohydrates. And so it's just going to be more nutrient dense, and that's also going to have a protein sparing effect along with it as well. Now you can see over on the bottom of this image that we also see the oligosaccharides in here. We do have glucose, galactose, fructose, So these are going to serve as an energy source in here, but even beyond just the energy source, they also support mineral absorption and drive the immunomodulatory effect. And you see that literally with every single category when we start breaking dairy down, that there are immune modulating properties linked to that. In addition, we see that when you get into this vitamin and minerals section, there's a very long list of nutrients, micronutrients that we would expect to find in dairy. And so these are going to be things like your fat-soluble vitamins, your A, your E, your D, your K. You'll find the inclusion of minerals in here like calcium, magnesium, zinc, and selenium, and then you get the B vitamins in there. And these also serve antioxidative roles, so that's going to mean that they're going to have some positive impact on DNA protection. They're going to also act as an anti-inflammatory, and they're going to help promote amino acid metabolism. So here's the point about this, and this is really where I want to go, is that when you look at these facts, these are all things that would suggest that the inclusion of dairy in the diet, whole dairy in the diet, is beneficial as we age. So why do these studies not corroborate those same findings? And I think we have to look to a few things on this and what have been some of the admittedly acknowledged limitations on the implementation of dairy. And so first of all, many of these studies didn't look at providing adequate amounts of protein. They only provided bare minimum amounts of protein. Now, they don't exactly state it that way in the studies. They talk about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. But if you're really looking to try to preserve and certainly try to build lean muscle tissue, even at a younger age, you've got to go well above 0.8 grams per kilogram. I would say at a very minimum, you're looking at 1.6 grams per kilogram, and certainly even higher to try to optimize better for muscle protein synthesis. So that's one of the first things. The second thing is that there wasn't differentiation between low-fat dairy and whole dairy. And so as I alluded to earlier, the whole dairy certainly makes a difference there. In fact, I'll just quickly show you a piece of literature that supports that. And you can see here, this is out of Osteoporosis International. And it shows that the impact of whole dairy matrix on musculoskeletal health and aging. And what they show here is that we conclude that the dairy matrix, the whole dairy, exerts an effect on bone and muscle health that is more than the sum of its nutrients. And so really the idea is that we're looking at whole foods because of that summation of everything working together, having a greater physiological impact than just individual constituents that are found in that food and extracting those out. Now, I don't say that to say that we throw the baby out with the bathwater here. That would be like saying whey protein doesn't have a place in muscle protein synthesis. Well, that's a laughable statement because there's a mountain of literature out there to support the exact opposite of that. So we have to keep all this in perspective as well. But there's also other limitations that were acknowledged in these same studies, looking at reasons that you would apply whole dairy in individuals that are aging. And one of the ones that really stood out to me was many of these studies didn't include any type of resistance training program in the protocol or in the evaluation. And that's critical because when you're looking at muscle protein synthesis, you have to have some type of stimulus to promote muscle protein synthesis in the first place, and then you're going to consume that protein to facilitate that synthesis. So if you're not doing resistance training, if there's not some stress being applied to the muscle that is significant enough to have to undergo recovery and then force adaptation after that, then you just wouldn't expect to see any type of increase in lean muscle tissue from the consumption of dairy as a protein source, or really any other protein source for that matter. And so I think we have to acknowledge that, and certainly as studies go forward, that's something that they've got to consider. And I think just logically, that's not something I really need to twist your arm on. The logic behind that says that if I want to build muscle tissue, then I need to do some type of resistance training to substantiate that or to facilitate that. Now, there's one other reason that I think dairy is a really solid inclusion for individuals that are older, and that simply is that sometimes getting adequate amounts of dietary protein in can be quite difficult, whether that means that you just don't digest it as well, whether consuming, whether it's red meat, poultry, whatever the protein source is, animal protein source is, maybe you just it just doesn't sit well with you, or it's just hard for you to consume that amount of food anymore. And one of the things that's unique about dairy is that you can get a high quality protein in by just liquid consumption. So when we look at these other sources, they're not liquids, they're actually solid state foods. And when you look at milk, you can get that in a liquid. Now, of course, you can consume it as a cheese as well, or a yogurt, a semi-liquid. But the point is that you can generally, because of that liquid nature, get that protein in relatively easy and find a way to bridge the gap between what would be considered an insufficient amount of protein and getting you up to an optimal amount of protein that can actually truly facilitate muscle protein synthesis. And more importantly, not just approach this from a single mechanism of action, not be single or unimodal, if you will, but to be multimodal, multiple mechanisms of action here, where we're actually starting to address the immune system. We're having an anti-inflammatory effect. We're improving energy consumption and having that protein sparing effect, and directly stimulating the consumption of a substrate, a macronutrient that is going to directly improve the synthesis of muscle tissue. So that all being said, I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on that. My take on it is that we should be consuming milk throughout the lifespan. Development and maintenance of lean muscle tissue is critical at any point and every point in our life, and the cumulative effects from when we start at a young age to when we get older. What we do when we're younger, in our 20s and 30s, matters to when we're in our later years, and being able to maintain and preserve that. Don't take that as a statement that if you're in your 60s and you haven't done anything for the first part of your life that you shouldn't start now. You absolutely should, right? You can still make a huge impact on the remainder of your life by looking to do things to build muscle tissue. And point being is that dairy, especially whole dairy, can go a long way in facilitating and supporting that. So regardless of what age you are, I hope you found this information helpful today. Hey guys, if you want to know more about what we do out here at the ranch, go to harvesthillsranch.com. You can see the link to the website in the description below. And if you want to know more about how I help out patients and how we support them through my clinic, you can go to drarlandhill.com. The link is also in the description, so hope you can visit those and learn more and educate yourself and think about what you're doing for your health today and tomorrow. Until next time, guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. We'll talk to you soon.